Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Yes, patients will pay. Here's how Kettering Health did it. I am Ayla Ellison with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we will have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our presenters. We are thrilled to be joined by two fantastic speakers from Kettering Health Network. Joanne Yon, Vice President of Revenue Cycle, and Jana Mixon, Network Director of Patient Access and Central Scheduling. I'll now turn the floor over to John Dwight, Chief Revenue Officer at Simply, to begin today's presentation.
Thank you, Ava. And thank you also to Joanne and Jana for joining us today to tell their story. What we're going to do today is talk through how Kettering Health has both planned and rolled out a patient experience to really address the needs patients have around having a more consumer-centric and easier to understand patient financial experience, both before their visit and after their visit to the health system. The way we're going to walk through today is our first part will really be about addressing that upfront challenge of how do you start this journey, what goes into actually planning for a big major change like this, and how do you manage that transformation. From that, we'll then walk through really the three stages that Kettering has taken in going through this approach. First, by addressing a self-service financial experience, and then hitting on price transparency and affordability as two of the really big building blocks of what patients are looking to see in their financial experience. So you will hear all three of our voices trading off as we go through, and we'll take it away from here. So I will start by framing this as the question that a lot of health systems are facing, and Kettering Health certainly had this as well, where really the desire is for patients to think about their experience inside the hospital as the thing that really drives how they feel about the hospital. You really want to be known for what's happening with the interactions and all the people inside of the episode of care. But from a patient perspective, that episode of care really starts and ends with two financial questions. It starts up front with the uncertainty around what will this cost me? And then at the end, when the bill comes through, it's the big question of how will I pay for this? And so any health system that's really looking to provide a true end-to-end great patient experience has to also think about those two questions in addition to what's actually happening inside the care journey. So before we launch into things, I will hand to Joanne to just do an overview of Kettering Health Network.
Thanks, John. Kettering Health Network is a multi-system physician, employed physician organization. When we did this slide, we had 8 hospitals. We now have 9 with a recent opening. Significant number of outpatient hospital facilities, 12,000 employees, 2,100 physicians. Our physicians are in approximately 160 practices or clinics. We employ a hospitalist group and some of the specialty groups as well that go along with a integrated system. We are Epic users. That's for EHR as well as all our business functions, scheduling through rev cycle, including clinicals such as the lab, radiology systems. We have a single business office, both combining hospital as well as professional services, and we do use the Epic SBO module, single billing office, which from a patient statement perspective puts hospital and pro on a single billing statement. We offer our patients MyChart, both for their clinical care as well as their business care, including payment of bills. So that's kind of where we started. And with that framework, we'll talk a little bit about what motivated us to look at Simply as a partner to enhance our patient experience.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne.
Thank you, Joanne.
So what we'll do here is I'm going to walk us through a few different stages of this, asking questions to Joanne and Jana around really their sort of thinking and planning leading into it. So I'll start with Joanne, exactly that question that you kicked off with. But could you just tell our group today what motivated you initially to invest in the patient financial experience?
From a pure business standpoint, I don't think we're different than probably anyone else on this phone. We really needed to get very strategic about how we would increase patient payments. The high deductibles, probably more than the uninsured patients, have been an ongoing business challenge, both from getting payments as well as the, just purely getting payments, but the increasing deductibles and helping our patients manage that experience has been more and more of a challenge. So we also looked at what our current tools are. I've already mentioned we are MyChart users, or we offer that capability to our patients. That said, we don't have a significantly high MyChart adoption rate in our market. And so offering that didn't seem to be really meeting the patient where they needed to be. We went, looked at detail around how much, about patients' payment history, including, are they paying cash? Are they paying check? Are they paying credit card? And with those business needs identified, said, how are we going to bring a better solution to patients? So that's the financial side. The other is we just have to get in the heads of our patients. It really needs to be something that's patient-focused, not Kettering Health network-focused in terms of the optimal solution.
That's great. And then going one level down from that, did you have some specific goals or metrics that you were really looking at to saying, what you wanted to do in terms of making the patient financial experience more consumer friendly?
Yeah, John, we actually focused a lot on our customer service outcomes and some of our customer service responses as it relates to our Press Ganey results, as well as feedback and direct information that we were given from our patients. The other thing, and you're going to see this throughout the presentation, are specific metrics related to how our call centers were operating and what kind of improvements we could make there, as well as a really big key indicator for us was really being able to deliver a standard process regardless of the way that the patient entered into our organization. And what I mean by that is how they entered in to the digital experience with us. If they called us on the phone and they were attempting to talk to a customer service rep, if they logged in directly from the internet, because Joanne has already mentioned that we don't have a really high adoption rate of MyChart, or if they were using their MyChart. We wanted all of the patients to experience a standardized way of communicating with us about their financial needs and how we could meet them in the middle and make this a successful transaction for them.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, moving on.
This is Joanne again. Just one more point. That, I think like all organizations, we talk about collecting money from the patient. The flip side of that is bad debt. And between, really strategically, we've looked at that whole patient experience from how patients pay to patients that are unable to pay through financial assistance, and then patients that choose not to pay in bad debt. So we've chunked it off, and finding a strategy to help patients pay more easily in a way that they wanted to was one of those building blocks.
Great. So next set of questions is around how you decided to move forward, having made that decision and what you were aiming at. As you thought about this decision, I think there's health systems that kind of come to the conclusion of we need to do something to make the patient financial experience better, but then it's, well, what do we do? What options did you think through? Did you think through kind of staffing differently, building technology internally, looking for a partner? Can you talk about what you considered in terms of this journey, and then how did you ultimately choose the path?
Yeah, I can. Actually, all of those things. We had kind of an internal process. We were connected using our bank's application to take payments through our intranet. We've already talked about MyChart, and we have been looking at staffing in our customer call center and some of the areas where we were truly patient-facing because we were interacting with the patients on a daily basis. And what we came up with was what I mentioned on the previous slide is that it's really important to us to look and feel the same to the patient. So when we were looking for a tool, it became really clear to us that Simply was able to deliver something that would be able to overarch all of those platforms. It's something that our customer service team can easily interact with and use, as well as the patient, and they're seeing the exact same thing. And it connects and works with MyChart easily. So we were able to make the determination that was the direction that we wanted to go.
And as you were making that decision, what was the biggest challenge that you faced? Were it challenges in kind of getting buy-in or getting different groups to work together internally around deciding on a tool to use going forward?
That's a great question, because here at Kettering Health Network, we've made a significant investment in Epic as our EMR. And we really had to develop a strong business case that said Epic is really good at a lot of things. And they are consistently working on development for processes and new modules and things that are coming out. But we had a need to get speed to market. We had to get this out there in a way that, internally we made a decision that we couldn't necessarily wait for the development. We're happy to participate in providing input to them, but we needed something today. So our biggest challenge was really making the business case to stray away from the system that we kind of consider the king.
Mm-hmm. This is Joanne. The other thing in our decision making, it was a lot about payments, but it was also that patient-facing capability on self-service payment plans, which we didn't have previously, and self-service for estimates, where it required more of a rep kind of interaction. And it keeps going back. I think I say it probably too many times. It's about meeting the patient where they're at, and it was kind of fun as we were talking about what's possible. We would have different stakeholders from, whether it's, call it the age of the stakeholder or technology savvy, kind of on that technology spectrum, talking about, what does someone who's tech savvy want to do? What does someone who knows how to do email want to do? Because it couldn't be a one-size-only solution, but we really needed to try to pull it together so ease of use with consistent outcome was our end game.
Yeah, great, thank you. So let's move to our final question here around implementation. So can you talk a little bit about, and let me actually set this up, that I think this can be sort of the scary part of trying to implement new technology. The system is thinking through, okay, what will this be like for me in terms of implementing? Can you talk about your experience in going through implementation and advice you might have for other revenue cycle leaders facing that same kind of question as they're in their decision process?
Yeah, so when we signed the contract at the beginning of the summer last year, we had best intentions to put it in, like I said, speed to market is what we were looking for. We were looking for some relief, and we were looking to really start getting that cash moving in just a little bit quicker. But what we ended up with is some competing priorities within our own internal resources, and we were a little afraid to put in something that could potentially have a significant impact on our financials at the end of the year. So that was one of our biggest challenges, was the timing, the right timing in the right place and the right resources. And as far as advice for revenue cycles, other revenue cycle leaders, it would be just to think through those types of things. You know, I'm sure that most of the other organizations that are on the phone have a lot of different things coming at them as far as whether or not they're compliance or regulatory or just process changes within your organization. And prioritizing this and putting it in the right spot and giving it the amount of attention is what's really important. You know, we lived and breathed Simply for several months, but we've had really good success with it, and you're going to see some of that in just a few minutes. Joanne, anything you'd add as far as advice?
I think some of it is the aspect of project management. You know, it really is helpful, as Jana alluded to, is someone needs to wake up and go to bed thinking about the project. It can't be kind of a because with that focus, we did move quickly. We intended on having a 6-month implementation or even a little less because we chose not to implement in that December timeframe. We went right after the first of the year.
Great. All right. Well, as you said, Jana, let's get into now seeing what you put in place. And I'll lead us in a little bit here with the, a bit of the context, what's happening across the market, and a kind of a common refrain that we hear is that it's no longer about comparing the experience of what a patient sees at one health system versus the other, but the expectations of patients are really being set outside of healthcare by retail. Wherever consumers go, they are accustomed to getting convenience and personalization. They're accustomed to interacting in a self-service way. And those same people that are consumers outside of the hospital are, when they interact with healthcare, they are still behaving like consumers and expecting those types of consumer experiences. I think Joanne, either you or Jana hit on this point really well too in the beginning when you talked about bad debt. But there can tend to be a sentiment of, well, there's going to be patients that will pay and there's going to be patients that won't pay, and there's just not a lot you can do about it. But there's some data that suggests that really it's not so much a foregone conclusion, but part of the challenge is just a big gap between, on the left here, the overwhelming majority of patients that feel the responsibility to pay for the bills, so 85% feeling that responsibility, but only 20% of patients saying that the process of paying and understanding the bill is convenient, and that's the gap that really you can solve for when you put in place a patient financial experience that really meets those consumerism needs. So with that, Jan, I'll hand to you to talk about the experience that you've got in place now at Kettering.
Yep. So this is what we look like when you try to access us through a digital portal. You've got on the left there our intranet page, which you can see down at the bottom, very high priority, large buttons that say pay my bill, estimate my bill, and then finally sign into my chart. The really cool thing is that there are no passwords to remember, nothing that the patient needs to keep in their little secret spot in their wallet or whatever that is in order to access the bill pay through our intranet site. The only thing that they need is their guarantor number. On the right is the experience that the patient will get if they are logging in on a mobile device. Same thing, the 3 large buttons and no need to remember passwords, just the guarantor number. Once the patient enters the guarantor number and they are brought to their home screen, kind of what their billing record for Kettering Health Network looks like, you'll notice there on the left-hand side there are tiles. The tiles indicate a specific visit to one of our facilities or to one of our physicians. You can see that they're all broken down into individual buttons, so that if a patient wanted to dive into them and look at the specific information behind them, they could do that by clicking on View Their Bill. They've also got a little bit of flexibility with selecting a particular bill to pay, but what sticks out to you most is there on the right-hand side is the total amount due with the Make a Payment button right underneath that kind of drives them to what we want them to see. There on the right-hand side, you can also see a couple verbatim comments. One of the things that has been really great about Simply is the immediate feedback that we get from the patients about their billing and their payment experience. They're able to provide us with information real time that Simply shares with us on a regular basis to make sure that we're able to react to the feedback that the patients are giving us. So those are verbatim comments there on the left-hand side. So once you click into the green button and you're selecting to pay the bill for the $3,010.91, you can see here this probably looks very familiar to you because a lot of your utility bill payment options or your credit card payment options look like this. So to John's point a few minutes ago, our competition is no longer a facility that is operating across town or in another state. We're competing with the retailers. We're competing with the people that have really kind of honed in on making this process easier. So the patient has the option there to either pay their bill in full, pay a different amount, or set up a payment plan. If they select the payment plan, then what happens is they get a second drop-down box, which you can see a little bit of that, and we were able to set some specific parameters on what kind of payment plans we would allow. So we're not going to allow someone to set a payment plan of $10 for the next 50 years. We've got very specific criteria of how long we'll house an internal payment plan, and if they're not able to meet that criteria, we direct them back to our call center for a couple of reasons. We have external financing, but also something that Joanne talked about. We want to screen the patient from a financial assistance perspective to make sure that we're reducing their liability down to the lowest amount possible if we didn't do that at the point of entry. And again, you can see 3 of the verbatim comments there that are very, very intuitive and very, very similar. So what we're seeing is that patients like the option of being able to do self-service. They like the option of having the control of paying their bill at their fingertips and not having to make that phone call or write that check. Here at Kettering Health Network, we've seen a 41% growth in self-service payments in 2 months. Now, I don't know if we shared this, but we just went live January 28th. So if you were looking at us from an experience level, I'd call us a toddler. We're just beginning to walk, and the experience that we have had here at Kettering Health Network has been phenomenal. 91% of our payments are coming from self-service portals and self-service processes. This is some of our actual data. Prior to Simply, you can see here on this chart, the blue line there in the middle. Before Simply, I had shared with you that we had MyChart and an online direct internet access with our bank. The number of transactions by week are what you're seeing on the left side of the blue bar. On the right side of the bar by week, you're seeing those transactions grow exponentially week over week. The really interesting thing that we have learned is that not necessarily using MyChart, but we have a significant amount of mobile payments coming through the organization. About 60% of the patients are using their desktop or sitting at a computer somewhere, so actually accessing us through the internet portal that I shared, but 40% are using their mobile. We're experiencing 2 times the rate of a typical e-commerce mobile payment process here at Kettering Health Network. Here's another area that we've been able to show a lot of success, and that is with payment plans. I talked about the fact that the patients like being able to have the authority and the ability to set their own payment plan. And what we're seeing is significant growth from February. You can see February of 2019 when we had 1.3 million on active payment plans, and now we're at 2.4 million, and these are all self-service payment plans, which the patients are entering their credit card information or their checking and banking information to auto recur. So we're having a lot of success in actually collecting these month over month. Another implementation or intersection that we have experienced with Simply is that we're engaging differently with our patients. We talked about that we've been doing a single statement with physician and hospital for about a year. We've been on SBO. What we're also seeing now is with Simply is sending out an email reminder or text message reminder to the patients between statement level billing. So what that's done for us is within 7 days of receiving the first email, 41% of the patients are activating the link within the email and paying their bill from that point forward. We've got feedback you can see here on the screen that the patients are liking the email reminders and the application that they can link directly to and make a payment really fast and easy. This next slide is one of the ones that I think that we have really focused on. We talked about our call center staff and really giving them the tools and the ability to handle the patients in a different way and to provide them with additional options. One of the things that we here at Kettering Health Network were struggling with was that our call center staff in PFS, or our customer call center, were doing a lot of manual transactions for patients over and over. For example, if they were set up on a payment plan, they would call in every single month and give their credit card over the phone to make their payment. We've been able to decrease the number of payment-related calls that are handled by staff because along with Simply through the web, we also put in an IVR to our customer service center, allowing the patient to use their telephone to pay their bill as well. And it's processed through a Simply transaction. So all of the ways that a patient is able to pay their bill via the internet or MyChart are also offered to the patient on the phone. You can see prior to Simply, our calls have decreased for representative-assisted transactions by 62%. So those patients are taking care of their payments on their own. And again, kind of focus back on our competition and the retail world. You know, we have seen and realized a Net Promoter Score of 44, which is almost twice, the healthcare billing office average. So we're pretty proud of that. And the comment there on that screen is actually one of my favorite verbatim comments by a patient. Because I think they realize how, to me it feels like they realize how technical and how difficult the medical billing world can be, and they recognize that we've done a lot of work to make it easy and fast and convenient for the patient. So, and I think we're handing it back. Yep.
Yeah, this is John again. Jana, thanks so much for taking us through that, and congrats also on the great results. So what we're going to transition now to is some of the other stages of this experience that the Kettering is rolling out, and we're going to first talk through price transparency, which has been probably the dominant story in terms of healthcare, at least for the first half of this year. And a lot of this focused around regulation, around showing charge master pricing. And I'll start this, then hand back off. But in terms of what are patients really looking for when asked, and 88% of consumers want to know their payment responsibility up front. It's not surprising. It's the same thing that you get in retail, where nobody goes into the checkout of a store or an online checkout without knowing what the cost is of the things that they put in their basket. And on top of that, 81% want an online estimation tool. So they really explicitly want not just to know what their payment is going to be, but patients are asking for a way to be able to do this on their own without having to wait for a piece of paper, having to figure out which phone number to call into. The other side of this, too, is what happens when patients don't have this or the expectation's not met. And there's really there's good data showing that basically when you aren't able to meet the patient expectations, they're going to call. So a big gap in terms of the likelihood of a patient to call when the bill has exceeded their expectations versus when a bill has met expectations. And Jana walked through the data both around the self-service transactions, but also the calls that were coming in related to payment. Here's another accelerator of it too, is that not just being able to make a payment, but understanding ahead of time what the expected payment would be is another big way to start to drive those costs down. And with that, Jana, let me turn to you to talk through the experience that you are putting in place.
So what we've been working on here at Kettering is providing some services that make sense. We're dipping our toe in the water. We're determining. I talked in the beginning a little bit about the patient financial experience and the exercise that we went through to make sure that Simply was the right fit for us. We've got an estimator, a staff-facing estimator in place right now. We're looking at what Epic can do, but we really wanted something that we could get out there for the patient so that they could understand some of the more common procedures and they could do some of that on their own as well. The home page, I've already shown you what that looks like on the computer as well as on the mobile screen, so it looks the same here. But if the patient were to select Estimate My Bill, they get the opportunity to select the procedure that they're looking for. They can look for a procedure by CPT code. If they have it on their order, they can use normal layman's language and type that information in, and they can also search for a particular body part, and it'll drive them to the specific test that they have located on the internet or on our website for that body part. The patient inputs their insurance information. The Simply portal connects to an eligibility partner and brings back eligibility benefits and puts it into an estimate that's presented to the patient in the format that you see there on the screen. Very simple to understand, calling out information or the amounts that are applied to deductible and or co-pays.
Great, thanks, Jana. And so our third act of this is we're going to talk through affordability and the plans put in place to address this. And I'll lead into this with one of the most striking stats that I had seen, which is around how consumers, not even just patients, how consumers broadly think about healthcare affordability. So in a poll of topics that were rated by level of concern, healthcare affordability was called out as the number one concern that people had. What's amazing is that it's a little hard to read some of the titles on here, but considering the things happening around us now, what was not number one on this list? So things like the economy or the environment or job growth. So it's absolutely a not just kind of top of mind within healthcare, but this is top of mind for consumers generally. And it's a cause of stress. 3 in 5 Americans saying that their healthcare costs are a significant cost of stress. And so it's a bit of from a healthcare perspective, obviously stress is something that can lead towards bad outcomes from a wellness standpoint. So there's not just a financial motivation to solve for this, but really in terms of treating the patient's full health picture. So Joanne, I will turn to you and to talk through how you at Kettering are thinking about solving this problem.
Thanks, John. I think you made an important point that, and it truly is our belief that we want patients to come to Kettering Health Network for their health needs. And we know that concern over their financial obligation can actually get in the way of that. It could be the patient that's discharged from the hospital and does not do their follow-up visits because they're afraid they're going to have to pay too much out of pocket or that deductible is too high. So we've looked to trying to use data to meet that patient where they're at. Within the Simply application, there is analytics that allows us to present to the patient personalized payment options. And then we've already talked about, and then how we proactively communicate that. We've tried to flip it that we're bringing information to the patient or trying to drive information to the patient versus wait for that patient to call when they're already stressed out or starting to have very significant concerns. So that pushing the information, again, also lets patients do it on their time, not on our time, which is 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. And it brings that information together so people can make their own choices. The personalized experience is, like it shows here on this slide, about matching that patient need. The analytics can help us determine what's that patient's likelihood of paying and in what kind of increments. So we can push out to patients what we believe would be most acceptable to them based on what we know about them. There's two scenarios here showing two patients both owing the same amount, but based on the analytics having different capacity to meet that financial obligation. This is always a work in progress. People's financial situations change. And so the analytic part of this is always learning as well to try to give the patient the most up-to-date information. For us, I already mentioned that use of Simply is one of our tactics in our whole patient financial experience strategy. So we not only want to anticipate perhaps how a patient would best pay, but we also want to identify those patients early on that do have a need for financial assistance. That's real consistent with our mission. It's also consistent with what the IRS would think under 501R to offer the patient. So trying to package it up in a way that the patient feels like they're working with one organization, not multiple organizations that all know a little bit about them. So this has been trying to continue to use what we know in a way to meet our patients' needs is an important part of that strategy. So we'll move on to our closing thoughts, which is so much about how Kettering Health Network has approached this. We need to put ourselves in our patient's shoes. We're real good at talking revenue cycle talk or healthcare talk, but a lot of times that doesn't meet our patients' needs. We need to put things in front of them just like they're doing other business and put ourselves in their shoes. From a business standpoint, we needed to and have set clear goals for our patient financial experience, what we want our patient to experience. And in that, Jana talked about that ongoing input and feedback from our patients via the Simply tool is really important. When we did our implementation, we knew that we had some quick wins, and that was to start moving payments to a more self-service. You saw some of our measurements today. We are continuing to measure not only impact that Simply has, kind of the volume of things going through Simply, but also the impact on our call center and figuring out where we have capacity to serve our patients in other ways. And finally, that we do that measurement for success, not just for the first month or for the first 3 months, but continuing to find out, we haven't hit any plateaus yet, but we've thought about, well, when it becomes plateaued measured, then what? What are we going to bite off to continue to improve that experience? So with that, I will turn it back to Ayla because I think we're at the point of addressing questions that may have come in.
Yeah, so thank you so much, John, Joanne, and Jana for that fantastic presentation. And we will now begin today's question and answer session. So please submit any questions you have by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your dashboard, and we will try to get through as many questions as we have time for. We've already had several questions come through, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first one here on the list. And this question is, how quickly does the EMR get updated when a transaction is done on the Simply software?
It's a nightly file that runs in every night with all of our payment posted transactions.
Great, thank you so much. And another quick question is for either Joanne or Jana, is do you currently use the Epic estimator?
We do not, but we're looking at that at the moment.
This
Great,
is Joanne.
thank you.
And it's really trying to, again, figure out, we want to continue to say, okay, how are patients coming in? How are they accessing us? It's not going to, our intent is it certainly wouldn't be different information. It's just figuring out how many roads do we need all to the same location.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We've had several questions come in, so lots of interest. So I'll go ahead and keep working through these. The next question is about using the feature. So this person asks, throughout the self-service feature, does it indicate that it's an estimate?
Yes, it does. It indicates that it's an estimate when they go into the estimate feature, but then there's also a very specific disclaimer on the screen that shows up when they're presented with the estimate information, and if they print it out, it prints on that information as well. And we are able to go in and view the estimate after it's created by the patient.
And that's been a really important enhancement. Sometimes if we were giving an estimate and then the patient would present for services, keeping in sync between what was said, and if the estimate comes back as not being what the patient expected, we have more information to help answer the question of why not. It could be it's a different service, could be that patient's a different place in their deductible. There's lots of reasons I think everyone on this call would know that an estimate is truly that, an estimate at the point in time. And this allows our staff to kind of be fully equipped to answer those questions.
Great. Thanks so much for that clarification about the estimate. The next question that we had come through relates to setting up a payment plan. So this person wants to know, or this person said, we are implementing an online payment portal and are discussing whether or not to allow patients to set up a payment plan. Did you notice a drop in the % of full payments received?
No, we really haven't. And in fact, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing more payments coming in faster.
Great. Thanks so much. This actually, we had another question come in that sort of relates to this one, so it might be a quick response as well. But this person asks, with the ease of setting up payment plans, are you seeing any delays in cash flow on self-pay payments? I.e., are those that are previously paid in full now using payment plans?
The answer is no, and I've talked a little bit about our patient financial experience strategy. Just prior to implementing Simply, we also changed our payment plan policy or program. We used to be very, very generous in what we would accept for payments, and we've limited, and we actually ratcheted down our payment plans from not only how long we would accept payment plans, but the minimum balance per month on that we would accept from a patient. So we narrowed or maybe increased the parameter around the guard walls around payment plans, and it actually has served us well, both in terms of timing and the amount of money we're seeing.
Great. Thank you so much for providing a little bit more explanation there. And I think that the next question that we had come through kind of relates to timing as well. So this person asks, have you been able to speed up the time from date of service to patient billing, or are you still waiting for the explanation of benefits before you send the patient bill and give them the option to pay on the website?
We wait for the information from the payer before we move it. It doesn't actually go out to the patient until it moves to the patient responsibility bucket.
Great. Thank you so much. The next question it's a question about HIPAA. So this person wants to know, is there any additional HIPAA questions asked during the sign-on to pay my bill process to verify the patient's identity?
It asks for the guarantor and the date of birth.
Great. Thank you so much for that response. I think that we've had several questions come in related to the same topic, so I'm trying to group them together here for you. But the next question actually has to do with the customer service center. So it said, so this person asks, did you change in the self-service to lower the number of calls that came into the customer service center? So I think they're just wanting to know if you've had any change in the number of calls coming in since implementing the Simply software.
So like I said, we went live January 28th, and it took a little while for us to realize this metric, but we saw it last month. We've made a couple changes in our phone system software that I think contributed as well, but we were down in May in our customer service call center by 10,000 calls.
Great. Thank you so much. This next question has to do with also measuring results. So it's how do you measure success NPS using NPS?
So I'm hoping that John can jump in here and help us with this question just a little bit, because we're new to using the Net Promoter Score and exactly how it's calculated. He's given us a couple of lessons, but he will give you a much better answer than I can.
Yeah, and I think there's two parts of this. I think there might be, and I'll answer one part, which is that the NPS. I think the general question was how do you measure success also. But for those unfamiliar, Net Promoter Score, it's a cross-industry metric that's used to measure loyalty. So it's measured in the hospitality industry. It's measured in travel. It's a common metric, which is why it's kind of an indicator that can be used across industries. The way that Kettering is measuring it through the Simply platform is there's a patient survey that happens in real time after a payment experience, which actually asks that question on a 0 to 10 scale, how likely are you to recommend? And the math behind Net Promoter Score is you take your 9s and 10s, which are your promoters, you subtract out your 0 through 6s, and as a percentage, that gives you what your Net Promoter Score is.
So from our perspective on Kettering, some of the metrics that we shared with you, so our reduced call volume, the increase in payment plans, reduction in our bad debt, those kinds of things are what we're using to measure the success of the program.
Great. Thank you so much, John, for providing your expertise there on the Net Promoter Score. It's great to hear about some of the metrics Kettering is using as well. Looks like we have time for at least a few more questions, so we'll go ahead and move through the list that we have now. And this question is for Joanne or Jana, and it's what percentage of collections do you expect patient access staff to collect prior to services?
We have a dedicated pre-service and financial clearance team that works on our accounts that are scheduled in advance. I believe our percentage right now is about 30. Does that seem like the last number from? I was going to say between 30 and 34 from our HFMA data that we've got. But we're always looking to kind of push forward on that metric and look at different ways and different options that we can improve that.
Great. Thank you so much for providing a little bit more information there. We've had another question come in that relates to the payment plans, which you all have discussed quite a bit in detail today. So this person wants to know, can the patients who are on an existing payment plan add a new account to it via your portal, or do they have to contact a customer service rep to do so?
They can do it on the portal when they log into their payment plan, and I didn't have a screenshot of this, but the tiles that I showed in the one screen would show the visits that are on a payment plan and ones that are not on a payment plan, and they can add it. They would have to adjust their amount or their term within our guidelines if it changes what that would look like, but other than that, they can do it themselves.
Perfect. Thanks for clarifying that about how to add on new payment plans. The next question we have, which it looks like it may be our last question for today, and this person has a question about MyChart. So they ask, how long have you been using MyChart, and when you say low adoption, what % of patients do you currently have using it?
So we started on Epic in 2010, and MyChart was adopted fairly quickly after implementation. So I would estimate maybe around 2012 or so. We have about a 30% adoption rate across our organization. So that's why, and it is a focus for us. We've got some very specific strategies to increase the number of MyChart users out there on our physician side as well as on our facility side. Since we share an Epic system, patients see all of that information combined.
Great. Thank you so much for the information about your MyChart use. I think that is all the time that we have today for our question and answer session. But I want to once again thank John and Jana and Joanne for their excellent presentation. And I also want to thank Simply for sponsoring today's webinar. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.